When it comes down to it, it's probably a lot harder to remember all the intricacies about setting these up than it is to actually set up users. All I have to do is go up to the company file, and this of course would be related to the company directly, so that makes sense to go there, and come down about a third of the way where it says set up users and passwords. Then you're going to get a flyout menu that allows us to set up users, to change my own personal password, or to buy additional user licenses. I'm not going to get too much into licensing, but remember that each person that uses QuickBooks needs to have a license. And so if you're going to be installing it on multiple computers, you need to make sure that you do have the correct number of licenses. You actually can do this online now by choosing the Buy Additional User License option. Also, if I wanted to change my own password, I can do that once I'm logged on using my old password. So the person doesn't need to be logged on, or the administrator can do it. Since currently I am the only user and I am the admin account, I'm going to go to the Set Up Users option. This opens the user list, which at the moment is not very exciting. The admin account is created when you create your company file, and you can see that it also shows that I am the person logged on. Admin is the name shortened that it actually uses for the administrator account. To add a new user, all I need to do is click the new Add User button on the right-hand side, and it's going to bring me up into a wizard. What I want to do is add a couple of new people to my company. I'll start by adding Susan, and Susan is actually one of our accounting clerks. So I'll just type in her name, and this can be as simple or as complex as you want. Since I'm a small company, remember we're set up as a sole proprietor in this example, then first names are good enough. Then of course I need to enter a password for Susan. Your policy for passwords should be that they are strong, meaning a combination of alphanumerics, possibly even symbols, and of course the good old rules of don't use your birthday or your pet or your spouse's name. Those all go into place as well. When you enter a password on behalf of someone else, you can decide whether you want to enter the password they will keep or just enter kind of a placeholder one. In this case, I'm going to enter the password as password in all lowercase, and I'm going to tell Susan that she needs to change that password as soon as she logs on the first time. Anytime you create passwords, you always have to create it once and then confirm it to make sure that you don't have any typos and that you typed it correctly. Notice that there is also an option to add this user to your QuickBooks license. So if you purchased one that has maybe 5 user licenses and Susan is going to be the second person, I can go ahead and check that box. She then will be added to my licenses, and then I will only have 3 remaining. 1 for myself is being used, 1 for Susan is being used, and that would leave a remainder of 3. Once you get this simple information in, then you get to click Next, and this is where the fun begins. We need to decide what kind of access Susan is supposed to have. Does she have complete access, in other words, an admin, or only selected areas of QuickBooks? Or, as I told you, there's also that third option now for the external accountant. Susan should have access to selected areas of QuickBooks. She's not going to be an administrator, even though she will have a lot of privileges. So I'll click Next. Now it's going to take us through one screen at a time through each of the different types of things that people do within QuickBooks. It starts off with sales and accounts receivable. So, should the person have no access, full access, or selective access? You'll see these 3 options in virtually all of the next screens. I'm not going to repeat them each time because I think you get it. No access or full access is pretty self-explanatory. If you choose selective access, then depending on which screen you're on, you will get different options. In this case, for sales and accounts receivable, it would give Susan the option to create transactions only, to create and print transactions, or to create transactions and create reports. You also will see, because of security, that many of these options have a checkbox that regardless of what selective access they have, you can then give them permission or not to view complete customer credit card numbers. All right, well, we're going to remember that Susan is actually in accounting, so we're going to give her full access to sales and AR. We'll go to Next, which is purchases and accounts payable. Likewise, she should have full access here. What about checking and credit cards? Well, if she's going to be paying the bills and writing checks, she probably needs to have full access. But let's say, for example, that Susan does not work with inventory. In other words, she pays bills, but she should never be in adjusting inventory. Maybe that's handled in the warehouse. So I could give her either no access or selective access. I'm actually not going to give her any access to inventory because in her position as a bookkeeper and an accountant, she really doesn't need to track any of that. That would be up to somebody else. She'll need to work with time tracking since she's going to be writing paychecks. And of course that goes over to payroll and employees as well. And what about sensitive accounting activities? Well, if you don't remember what this is, QuickBooks is good about always giving us a description. Transferring funds between accounts, making general journal entries, and online banking. Susan will be in charge of many of these things, so once again, full access is appropriate. What about financial reporting, though? In this case, I'm actually only going to give Susan selective access. She's actually going to be working with the day-to-day runnings of the company as far as the accounting and bookkeeping goes. But does she need to have those overview reports? Not really. We're going to give her the ability to create reports only, but to not actually print them out. That way she can view any information she needs, but not actually make a hard copy that could get outside of the company. We would leave that up to maybe the CFO or the CEO. An accountant definitely needs the ability to change and delete transactions, and you can see that there are actually two options here. First, the ability to change or delete transactions in areas they have access to. That's important. Only areas that they've already been given permission to go into. Or should they also have the ability to change or delete transactions that were recorded before the closing date? There's that closing date again. Remember that if things are done before the closing date, what you're saying is, I want to go back into records that we've already closed out, that we've said everything is fine and everything is reconciled, and we're going to make a change. That isn't something that should be done. Actually, very rarely should that be done. I'm actually going to leave that at no. Even though Susan is in accounting, I would want our head accountant to do that, not her. Here we get to see a summary of all of Susan's access permissions. You can actually print this out, and it's kind of too bad. I think they should make a report for it. But if you need to have a copy of this, you could always do a print screen using the print screen button on your keyboard and then paste it into something like a Word document to print it out. Otherwise, that's all there is to it. All you have to do is click Finish. If at any time you need to work with the user, you can come into the same box and you can just click on Edit. That will basically run the wizard over again. If somebody quits or they shouldn't have access to the file any longer, you can also delete the user. Or if you just want to bring up that summary of their permissions, you can select them and click View User. Other than that, all you need to do is go through and add each individual and be careful which permissions you give. If you have to err on the side of not giving them access. Then of course they'll come to you and say, you know, I wanted to do something and it wouldn't let me do it today, and you can change the permissions then. It's better to have this QuickBooks file too restrictive than not restrictive enough. When you're all finished, you can click Close, and it takes you back to the QuickBooks interface.